start off with this RSV vaccine news, which there's been a lot of over the last month. Since we last spoke, there's been yet another development.
What's the latest news there?
Yeah, you're right. There has been a lot of really encouraging news around RSV vaccines lately, and that most recent news is last Wednesday the FDA approved Pfizer's RSV vaccine for older adults. That's the second vaccine that's soon going to be available for this age group. We know that earlier last month, the FDA also approved an RSV vaccine from GSK for older adults. And then just a few weeks ago, it approved that first ever vaccine to protect babies from RSV. Of course, these vaccines all need to be considered by the ACIP, which is CDC's advisory committee, and they'll be making a recommendation to the CDC director on appropriate use of each of these vaccines. And that committee is scheduled to meet on June 21st. Like GSK, Pfizer expects its vaccine to be available in the fall, which is just in time for RSV season.
Andrea, any differences between the two?
Well, both of these vaccines are comparable in terms of their effectiveness. An FDA review of Pfizer's vaccine showed that it was 86% protective against lower respiratory tract illness with 3 or more symptoms, and a similar review of GSK's vaccine found that it was 83% effective. So like with COVID, people will have vaccines to choose from once they're widely available. This is excellent news. RSV carries that increased risk for older adults, and we know based on the CDC data that RSV results in between 60 and 160,000 hospitalizations each year for those adults 65 and older, and between 6,000 and 10,000 deaths each year as well.
Well, that is really good news. Andrea, will keep an eye on these vaccines and those upcoming recommendations from the CDC. RSV wasn't the only respiratory virus that was making headlines, though, this past week. A new report from the CDC got everybody talking about another virus.
What do we need to know about that?
So CDC released a report at the end of May saying that cases of a virus known as human metapneumovirus, or HMPV, were higher than normal last winter and spring. That peak occurred in mid-March with nearly 11% of PCR tests showing a positive HMPV diagnosis, and more than 19% of antigen tests were also positive for HMPV. To provide some context, in the months leading up to the pandemic, that percentage for HMPV positive results were really between 4 and 7%. So that was really quite an uptick that we're seeing. HMPV is a lesser known virus, but it's certainly been getting a lot more attention after that CDC report. It's a paramyxovirus, so it's like RSV, measles, and mumps. For most people who get it, though, it's going to feel like a common cold. They'll experience symptoms like nasal congestion, cough, shortness of breath, and fever.
A lot of friends who are kind of suffering from mysterious illnesses over the course of the past fall, and couldn't identify what it was. So maybe it was that. There's been obviously a big increase. Do we
know what is driving an increase like this?
So there could be really a couple of factors at play here, and we know that COVID testing has declined overall, but as a country, we're really more focused on identifying the cause of any respiratory illness than we were before. And pre-pandemic, if someone experienced cold-like symptoms, they might have just shrugged it off, but now they're more likely to go to their doctor and get tested. And so this more regular testing has made it easier for us to identify these trends that we're seeing in things like RSV and HMPV. There also may be a timing component to it, like with the spike in RSV cases. It was last year when people really started to emerge from the pandemic. And before that, we know people had been masking more consistently and staying home. Now they're masking less and going out more. And as a result, we could be seeing this resurgence of some infectious diseases.
Now we have a rather long list of viruses that we're worrying about right now. Is HMPV
one that we need to be extra vigilant about?
Well, it's certainly something that we'll continue to keep an eye on, but for the most part, it's mild and it's not a cause for concern. I think with that being said, like RSV, it can have more serious consequences for young children, for older adults, for those who are immunocompromised. In general, though, it's a virus that we've been living with for decades. We're accustomed to it. And while there's no vaccines available, physicians are prepared to help patients treat their symptoms, and recovery time is typically 3 to 7 days.
Well, good. I'm going to put that in the
Not worry about column on the virus sheet.